This afternoon, we're going to look at a study on the church in Laodicea. We're going to read here a little bit in portions about this church found in Revelation, the 3rd chapter. I want to put this map up here to kind of help us get a starting point of figuring out where Laodicea is. It's one of the churches, 7 churches of Asia that's referred to in the book of Revelation. It's kind of I don't want you to think of a small town, but it's a metropolitan town. It's a very large town, commercial town that is in the crosshairs of multiple highways coming together. You can see on the map above Laodicea, you see that watering. That was an aqueduct system that brought the water into Laodicea. The local water, as I understand it from the various research that I read, was kind of acidic and it wasn't safe for humans to drink, but it did produce a wool in the sheep there that was more black, and it became a very rare commodity that helped drive lifestyle in Laodicea, a very rich town, a very wealthy town. In fact, I believe it was Nelson's Bible Dictionary Illustrated that I was reading about this. It said around 62, 63 A.D., Laodicea suffered an earthquake. And so wealthy were the citizens that they didn't depend on the government to rebuild, but their own citizens rebuilt the city. So it kind of gives you an idea of their wealth. And it wasn't a small town. As you zoom in a little bit closer, obviously this is an AI image that I asked to create based off all the knowledge that was available about the city of Laodicea, that it began to include some of these things. You see kind of in the lower, my right hand, I got to see this. Okay. Yeah, over here in the lower right-hand corner, which one of these hits? There you go. This has been their manufacturing area for their wool and all of this. You have very famous, lavish bathhouses here. You have a school of medicine here that was tied to a false god that they worship. You had up here in the upper right-hand corner or left-hand corner there a gym and then what they would call the gymnasium up there, the track basically, and then right below that is the gladiator arena. You can think of that like having an NFL's team in there and having an NBA team in town. That's exactly what it looks like. This is a major city. They've got temples, they've got Zeus you see pictured there, and in the very back of that picture you see the aqueduct coming across. This town was not a small town by any stretch of the imagination. It was not a poor town. It was very wealthy, and the people there were of great wealth and great importance. And so that kind of sets the stage as we begin to dive into this letter to the church at Laodicea. One of the things that we're going to realize as you start to dig into this, when you understand the background of the town of Laodicea, and then you hear what God has to say to the church at Laodicea, one of the conclusions that has to be drawn is, and a warning for us, is the town, the place, the time that we live in can have an impact on the church and how we conduct business in the church. And God is going to use some play on words here as he talks to the church at Laodicea about their spiritual condition that come directly out of this context. Another element about this town, that school of medicine produced an eye salve that was renowned throughout the Middle East at this time as being the only cure for various illnesses of the eye. Very famous for that kind of stuff. And so as we begin to read here about God's evaluation of their spiritual conditions, he says, "Unto the angel of the church of the Laodiceans write, These things saith the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of creation of God. I know thy works, that thou art neither cold nor hot. I would that thou wert cold or hot. So then, because thou art lukewarm, and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth. Because thou sayest, I am rich and increased with goods, I have need of nothing, and knowest not that thou art wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked." As he begins this, I want you to think about this. He says, listen, I know your works. And he begins to talk about them being lukewarm. And I want to back this up. If you go due north of Laodicea to Hierapolis, they were known for their hot springs. And if you go out to the side of Laodicea, they're known for their cold springs in Colossae. But the water, as it came down the mountains in this aqueduct, it would arrive at Laodicea at what we would call room temperature or lukewarm. And what the Laodiceans would do would be collect that water into their clay jars and bury it in the ground for cooling, because you couldn't drink that, or they didn't like drinking the room temperature the lukewarm water. And it's that very thing that God plays off here when he starts off and says, I know your works. Now, when we look at this, I don't want us to misunderstand. God's not saying to them, hey, you're not doing enough works to earn your salvation, or your works aren't a severe enough amount that equals your salvation. He's not tying their salvation to their works in a sense of earning their salvation, but rather he's saying, listen, I'm looking at your works because they reveal something to me. They're revealing what's really in your heart. And he illustrates that by taking this play on this hot, cold, and lukewarm, the waters of that area. And he's playing, I said, you're not hot, you're not on fire for me, you're not indifferent to me, but you're like that water, and you know how you think of that water. It's not even good enough for you. You take it and bury it in clay pots so that it'll be cooler, and you won't even drink that lukewarm water. And so what I see when I see you is people that aren't indifferent to me, they're not cold to me, but your works are revealing that you're just kind of there, just kind of going through the motions, if you will. You're not hot, you're not cold, but you're just going through all of these things. And he says, you've got this view of yourself, this picture of who you are that's not accurate. It's not fitting with the reality. You look at yourself and you say, listen, I'm rich and I have all these things, and you don't know who you really are. They are counting on their wealth, their goods, and they're saying, look at all that we have. Everything that you need in life can be found in this city. And we have it. We've got the schools of medicine. We've got all the temples here. We've got all the sports and the entertainment, and everything that you need is here. And we don't need anything. And God says, listen, you don't realize that you're wretched and miserable. What do you mean? Well, you think you're doing okay. You're checking your bank account. You're checking the toys. You're checking how nice your house is, how good the cars are running. But you don't see what's really happening. That the reality is you are poor and blind and naked. Now, those are stark contrast to the city that they're living in. They're living in one of the wealthiest cities, and he says, you're poor. You think you're okay financially, but you're really poor. You're in the city where this eye salve is made that heals all the sickness and disease of the eyes. And here you are blind, and you're in this city that has the finest wool, but you're walking around naked. You don't see who you are. And that's his evaluation of them. And he says, I have some counsel for you. I counsel thee to buy of me gold tried in the fire, that thou mayest be rich, white raiment, that thou may be clothed, and that the shame of thy nakedness do not appear. And anoint thy eyes with eye salve, that thou mayst see. As many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Be zealous, therefore, and repent. Now, here's the powerful part of this to me, is he says, I counsel thee, buy of me. You've been looking in the wrong place to meet your needs. You've been looking to the wealth, the college, the education, the financing, and the things of this city, of this life, to meet your needs. And God says, listen, if you want the real source, the true source of being wealthy, come to me. Buy these things, get these things for me. Let me be the source of your strength. And he says, I want you to go get gold, as opposed, not this gold that you're counting on that can buy money, or that is your money that you can buy and sell things and get gain with. He says, I have the real gold that's been tried in the fire. Gold that's not corrupt, gold that's pure, gold that's going to last. I want you to get that for me instead of this wealth you're counting on. I want you to come to me instead of the sheep and the wool of those sheep that you think are so great. Try on my white raiment. Be clothed with the clothing that I give you, that you can cover the shame of your nakedness. The wickedness that you are is covered by this pure white raiment. Come get something that really, truly makes you stand out. And that blindness that you have can be healed with the eye salve that I have. And that's the point that he wants them to make, to see in all of this. His counsel is valuable, but here's the thing about counsel. It's only valuable when you listen to it. I had a lot of people when I was younger that gave me good advice. They really did. They gave me good advice. I just wasn't smart enough to listen to a lot of it. And that counsel did me no good. And I want to tell you, it would have been the same outcome for anybody at Laodicea, that God comes to and says, here's my counsel to you. Turn to me for your dependence. Turn to me for your riches. Turn to me for your clothing. And they went, that sounds good, but I'm not going to do it. But in the middle of all this and calling them out for who they are, I want us to see a very powerful message in here. And that's the very last part of this verse when he says, as many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. God's not calling them out to humiliate them. God's not pointing out the wrong view of themselves that they have. God's not showing to them, hey, you're trusting the wrong things, just to do that, to be mean to them, to pick on them. He said, I'm showing you this out of love. And that's where looking at this counsel that God gives has to be seen through this lens of he's trying to do what's best for these people. That they have fooled themselves into thinking that they have a pretty good life. And God's saying, you're not seeing the real picture. Listen to me. There's a better life for you, and it's not built on the things that you see that are all around you. It's built on me and what I can give you and the life that I can help you have. And I'm doing this because that's what I want you to have. And he tells them, I want you to understand, despite me pointing out all of your flaws, that hope remains for you. He says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man will hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him and will sup with him, and he with me. To him that overcometh, I will grant to sit with me in my throne, even as I overcame and sat down with my Father in his throne. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. And there's the hope, isn't it? That despite all of these things that they were doing here, if I back up far enough, that they're poor, blind, miserable, and naked, that they're trusting themselves, that they see all of that, God says, I see all of that, and I know your works, and I know who you are, and I've got the answers, and here I stand at the door. Isn't that amazing? Now, no, these are not people that do not have a relationship with God. This is to the church at Laodicea. People that had obeyed the gospel, that in some ways thought they were serving God. And God looked at them and said, you're missing it. You've settled for a life that's less than. And despite the poverty that you've accepted, despite your blindness, your nakedness, despite the fact that really you're wretched and miserable, I've not left. I'm still at this door, waiting to bless you with a better life. I'm sitting here knocking, but I'm not going to force it on you. If you'll open that door, I'll come in and we'll sit together and we'll sup together. And when you overcome, you'll sit with me on my throne just as I sit with the Father on his throne. Isn't that an amazing statement to stop and think about? That God said, I'll never forsake thee nor leave thee. And this is what he means. That even when I've messed up as bad as I mess up, he's still standing there going, listen to me. Buy from me, Mike. Take my counsel. And I think as I look at the church at Laodicea, I'm moved with gratitude for the God that we serve. You know, one of the things he says here at the end is, he that hath an ear to hear, let him hear. Pay attention. There's a message in here that wasn't just for the church at Laodicea, but for you and I. You know, I don't think it's a far stretch to say a lot of America looks like Laodicea. It really does. I mean, here we are in Oklahoma City. We've got our professional basketball team, our gladiators that we like to root for. Maybe we don't kill them necessarily. We just trade them off to another team, but you get the idea. We've got our banking centers. We've got our manufacturing centers. We've got our nice houses. And we live in a land of great luxury, of great excess. I don't think sometimes we fully comprehend just how wealthy America is. And if we're not careful, this letter could be written to us today. And he says, I want you to hear, and I want you to see the same hope today that I had for Laodicea. You know, I think there are some applications that we can draw out of this. And the very first one I want to share with you is to have a proper self-view of who we are. I think it's vitally important that you and I understand who we are before God, how God sees us, not how my neighbor sees me, not how my creditors see me, not how the bank sees me, not how the Joneses down the road see me. How does God see me? And He sees my heart. And He knows my heart through my works and what I'm doing with my life. You know, the heart reveals what's really important to me, doesn't it? We can look at what someone is doing in their life and we get a glimpse of their heart. That's why Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6, lay not up for yourself treasures upon earth where moth and rust doth corrupt, but where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourself treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, where thieves do not break through and steal. Why? For where your heart is, there will your treasure be. And when you look at a person's life and you ask the question, what are they laying up for? Are they laying up for the things of this world? And if they are, and if I am, doesn't that tell you where my heart is at? But if I'm laying up for spiritual things, things in heaven, where moth and rust doesn't corrupt and the thieves don't steal, it reveals my heart that what's really important to me. And so I can take an honest look at myself and begin to say, how do I see myself? What do I see in my life that's truly important, and how do I spend my time? You know, I think a lot of times we want to say, well, I'm not that important, and we have what we think is a really humble view of ourselves. I don't know a lot of people that walk around in the church bragging and boasting and have a exorbitant pride problem. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I just don't think it's as common as people that have a humility issue, a humility problem. That really is a pride problem because they see themselves lower than God sees them. In Romans, the 12th chapter, the Apostle Paul, by the Holy Spirit, writes, I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable in God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Now listen to verse 3. For I say, through the grace of God given to me, to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God has dealt to every man the measure of faith. Does he condemn pride here? Certainly, not to think more highly of yourself. But he goes on and says you need to have a sober, a sane, a realistic picture of yourself, that you're not just this worthless piece of trash, that you're a nobody, but that you're of value to God, and that you matter to God, and that you can make a difference in people's lives, and that God cares about your life, and you can have an impact for His cause. To have a sober view that I'm a sinner saved by grace for good works to serve the living God. Isn't that what he's talking about in the first two verses? That because of what God has done for me, that I present to Him my life and say, Lord, it's yours to use. It no longer belongs to me. It now belongs to you as a living sacrifice, and that's how I see who I am. I'm not some great thing. I'm not some worthless thing. I'm a living sacrifice that you saved, that you consecrated, and you're changing me. You're transforming me through changing how I see this world, and I'm seeing this world beginning with how I see myself through your eyes, as you've dealt to every man the manner of faith. I have a proper view of myself, that God loves me and I have value to Him, but it's only through Him that I have that value. And I have a sobering view of myself. That's going to help me focus on what's important and not be distracted by the shiny things in this world. The promotion, the job title, the big house. You know, they're just now coming around and discovering, I guess not just now, but it's just getting popular to talk about neuroplasty, about how a person thinks and the rewiring of the brain. And man, you can go out and buy you self-help course for $400 on how to rewire your brain, or you can just open the Bible and find out how to do it for the cheap and the more effective way. The reality is God says how you think is going to impact how you live. And I want to start with you seeing who you are in my eyes. And that's going to help you walk away from those shiny things and not allow all of these things in life to distract you. And that's what happened at Laodicea. The wool, the banking, the school of medicine, the gladiators began to change how they saw themselves. And God says, I want you to have a proper self-view of you. But that can only begin when I'm honest with God and open and exposed before God. That's why the psalmist writes, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. I want to ask you an honest question this afternoon. Have you ever said this prayer to God and really meant it? It's kind of scary. Expose me, God. Show me who I really am. Pull all of my thoughts, my heart, and lay it bare on the table. And I don't care if the world sees it. Because I want you to lead me away from this wickedness. That's being honest. And that's being vulnerable for God. God, I want to see myself as you see me. I want to see where my heart's not in line with your heart. I want to see the wickedness that you see, and I want you to lead me away from that. I want to see me as you see me, as valuable, as a living sacrifice, completely surrendered to you. That was the counsel he was giving to them in Laodicea. Buy of me gold. Buy of me white linen. Get the eye salve from me. Let me give you a life that's really worth living. And it's the same counsel for you and I that begins with having a proper view of who you are before God. Not only that, but we see this whole idea. I don't know why I went there. We're going backwards. Not only is this a lesson of having a proper self-view, an issue that we've kind of been dancing all around at Laodicea was the materialism. And we've got to be honest, that impacts us in America today. It does. I looked this up just the other day to refresh my notes on this sermon. The first time I preached this sermon, Mike, was in 2009 when I studied this. And I looked up the consumer credit debt. 2009, it was in the billions. Today, American consumer credit debt, $5.17 trillion of credit debt in America. Doubled in the last 20 years. That's a scary number. The stock market, investing, planning for the future, the radio, the TV, constantly being bombarded. The newest, the latest, the greatest. You got the iPhone 17, shame on you. Don't you know an 18's out already? What are you, archaic? Get with the times. You drive a 2009 vehicle? What's wrong with you? Don't park that in front of my house, please. It's hit America. And if we're not honest about it in the church, it's going to creep out into the church. And how can we come out from among them, as the Bible instructs us, when we're living just like them? I want to tell you, I believe a great challenge for the American church today is to stand out and be holy and be different from the society that we're in. To live a different way than the world around us lives. God has always called His people, be different. Not try to blend in, but be different. Think back to the Old Testament. The dietary laws. What was the purpose of the dietary laws? I've heard people try to explain that and go, well, pork was unhealthy and those other foods were unhealthy and they would kill you. Really? If that was the case, wouldn't all the other nations that ate pork be dead? It wasn't about pork being unhealthy. It was about, I want you to be different even in how you eat. I want you to stand out. and be the oddball. Be the one that doesn't go to the catfish fry, which I kind of agree with. And it's the same for us. We need to live a life that's different. You know, God has constantly been warning his people about the dangers of materialism. Look back in the Old Testament, before God ever led them into the land of promise, he said, "And it shall be when the Lord thy God shall have brought thee in the land which he sware unto thy fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give thee the great and goodly cities which thou buildest not, and the houses full of all good things which thou filled not, and the wells digged which thou diggest not, and the vineyards and olive trees which thou plantest not. And when thou shalt have and eaten and been full, beware." That's the next word. When you've got all these great things, beware of what? "Lest thou forget the Lord which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage." It's a warning. The things of this life can cause you to forget God, to put God on the back burner and say, "I'll get around to the Bible study later. My prayers are going to have to wait. I've got to get to work to earn that paycheck, to pay for this house, to pay for this lifestyle." And pretty soon the prayers become less and less, and the studies become less and less, and the fellowship and hospitality becomes less and less, because we've bought into the materialism of the American life, and we've forgotten God. You know, he warned them a few chapters later. So important to God was this message that he didn't just tell it to them once. He told it to them a few chapters later and said, "Beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God, in not keeping his commandments and his judgments and statutes which I command thee this day, lest when thou hast eaten and art full, and hast built goodly houses and dwell therein, and when thy herds and thy flocks multiply, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all that thou hast is multiplied, then thy heart be lifted up, and thou forget the Lord thy God, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage." Isn't it amazing to stop and think about these people? They were slaves, and they're fixing to go into a land flowing with milk and honey, have all these vineyards, have all these great stocks, and they didn't plant one of the trees. They didn't have to do any work for it. God blessed them with it. And he said, "Be careful. Be very careful that you remember me, and that these things don't distract you from serving me." And I think that lesson ought to vibrate today, that the church and individuals collectively and individually need to hear the message that materialism can distract us from serving God. It can steal the fire for our willingness to go and do, because we busy ourselves with the things of this life. And so we see in Laodicea the same thing we see today is, don't let materialism get in the way, and guard your thoughts. We talked about having a proper self-view and thinking of yourself, but I want to elaborate it a little bit farther than that. You know, the Bible says here in Matthew 12 and verse 35, "A good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart bringeth forth evil things." Part of their problem was they had a wrong view of themselves, and they began to allow their thoughts to dwell on the things of this life, the materialism. And that produced their lukewarm works. And I want to tell you, it's going to be the same for us today. If we don't have the proper self-view of ourselves, and we allow ourselves to begin to fill our thoughts with materialism and the things of this life, our works are going to follow that, and they're going to be lukewarm. We're going to be inconsistent in our service for God. There's going to be a part of you that says, "I really want to grow as a Christian. I really want to know more. I really want to overcome this sin." Oh, look, a shiny new toy. And we have that desire, but we never fully fill it because we're thinking and focusing on other things. And God tells us a lot about our thoughts. That's why he writes in Proverbs, "For as a man thinketh in his heart, so he is." What you spend your time thinking about is going to impact what you do. Where's Brother McFadden? He said he was a negative person this morning. I want to tell you, that's not good for us. To be overly positive about everything and unrealistic, to be overly negative about things and unrealistic. I'm only picking on John. But the reality is how we spend our day thinking is how we're going to interact with this world. That's why God writes to us in Philippians 4 and verse 8, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. Now, I want to tell you, God didn't inspire Paul to write this to the church at Philippi so that 2,000 years later we could go to some arts and crafts store and buy a printout of this and iron it on our wall as a decoration. There's a truth behind this that he wants us to be gripped with. That what you think about matters to God because what you think about impacts how you live this life. It impacts what you're willing to do. If you don't have the right view of yourself and instead are thinking about the things of this life, you're going to fill your life with the things of this life. And we've got to be aware of that today. That what I spend my time thinking about is going to impact me. Now let me ask you an honest question. What's feeding your mind all day? When you finally have a break and you've got some free time, how many people do this? And just scroll endlessly. There's not the Bible in there. I'm not listening to teaching on the Scriptures. I'm watching some movie that's pushing out the ideology of humanity today, humanism. And I don't have time for a Bible study because the next episode's coming on. I can binge watch an entire season in a weekend. But I can't stop and open my Bible. That's programming my thoughts. And it's going to impact how I think throughout the day. And if we're not real careful about that, our thoughts end up on the things of this earth and not on the things eternal. In 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 18, the Bible says, while we look not at the things which are seen, but the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Does eternity fill your thoughts? Does it enter your thoughts? As you're thinking about what you're doing here and now and how you're going to spend tomorrow, does eternity enter into that thought at all? Man, I got to get this job done. It's the most important job in the world. If I don't get this done, it's going to be horrible. Really? What's going to happen in 40 years if that job isn't done? Is that job eternal? Is that TV show eternal? Is that crisis eternal? Or is there something more important that ought to be taking priority in your life? Now listen, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying slough off at your job, don't take care of your responsibilities, don't be a good steward of the things God has blessed you with. I'm saying learn from Laodicea that if we're not careful, my thinking's going to distract me from what's truly important. And I'm going to get my schedule and my life all out of whack. And the application boils down to this for you and I. Listen to God's counsel for your life. Listen, He wants a life for you that is joy and peace. Not one that, I'm not saying it's free from problems, free from trials, free from heartaches. I'm not arguing that. But the truth is when you look at a life lived as a Christian the way God describes it, that's a life worth living. That's a life that has purpose and meaning. And a life that we can look back on and say, God used me. And through that, I have eternity, and others have eternity. And that's really a life that makes a difference. Get the counsel from me. Quit looking to the world for how to solve your problems and turn to God. James says it this way, but be ye doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. For if any be a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is likened to a man beholding his natural face in the glass. For he beholdeth himself and goeth his way, and straightway forgetteth what manner of man he was. But whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty and continues therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed. It's not enough to hear the counsel, but we've got to start doing and living life the way God calls us to. Even down in the final moments, or the finite moments, the small details of my life, I've got to surrender that to God and say, God, you're in control. I want to buy from you gold. I want to be clothed in your white raiment. I want your eye salve to help me really see what I need to see so that I can do what you want me to do. I want to tell you this afternoon as we wrap up our study, just as the final message to the church at Laodicea was this: hope remains. I want you to know today, I think hope remains if you're struggling. If you've allowed yourself to have an improper view, if you've allowed your thoughts to be compromised with the things of this world, if you've been taken by materialism, if you're battling sin and feel like you're not finding victory, I want you to know hope remains. We serve a living God who's here to serve and to be the mediator between God and man. And he wants you to know that there is hope. That's why he said, come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden. He's still standing there. Yes, a lot of times we use this passage talking about taking his yoke, learning of him, learning that he's meek and lowly and finding rest to your souls. A lot of times we'll talk about this to those that are outside of a covenant relationship with God, and I think it's applicable to them. But I want to tell you, it's just as applicable if you're finding yourself struggling in your Christian walk. That Jesus is still standing there just as he was for the Laodiceans, saying, behold, I stand at the door and knock. And I know you're distracted by the things of this life. And I know you're distracted with not seeing you as I see you. And you're struggling. But if you'll just open the door, I can sup with you. And you can sup with me. If you'll just come to me, you can lay that burden down. Hear my counsel, follow my counsel, and you will find joy and peace and a life worth living. Not a life in Laodicea, but a life worth living. If you're subject to the gospel call this afternoon, we invite you to have a seat on the front row as we stand now to sing this song.